Gap is something that is disconnected. Parts in your life or in your life world are disconnected from each other. So there is some kind of a disruption, so it becomes difficult to grasp the wholeness of something because it's divided into parts. And this could also concern elements in your lives that are missing, themes or parts of the life story that are simply missing. And that is also a gap. When there is something that happens in your life that is unexpected or not comprehensible to you, you can't grasp it, you can't understand what happens. Something is changed or something you thought would not possibly happen, then it happens. And it shakes your whole view of life, your life world, yourself. Then a very difficult gap will appear in your life. You might have gaps inside of you where you don't understand yourself anymore or you do not recognize yourself anymore. You also might experience gaps between you and other people or between you and a totally new situation. I think those, if we call them so, even though they can be overwhelming, we can call them minor gaps. Like those kind of gaps we all have in our lives. We have all been abandoned in relationships. We have all gone through changes in our lives that might have been difficult for us. And those are parts of life. We can't escape them. Then there are other kinds of gaps, the more traumatic kinds of gaps where you've been exposed to trauma or severe oppression, abuse. And those are not and shouldn't be part of an ordinary human life. And those are, of course, more difficult to overcome and to live with. Many gaps are contextual. So you need to address the context of the person in order to understand the gap. You might experience a gap within yourself in one specific context, but not in another one. And perhaps you can find another context where the gap slowly could be closed. If a person lives in a society where there are very strong norms concerning gender identity or how you should live as a person of a specific gender, and the person feels that this is really not how I would live my life or how I would like to act or who I am, then it will, of course, be a gap within that person if he or she has to adapt to the context. The gap will be within. If the person is in another context where it's more okay to express oneself in ways that are not so gender stereotypical, then this gap will slowly close because it's permitted to express yourself in another way. But of course, there is also a risk that another gap appears, namely that the person is in another context, which he or she is not so familiar with. So he or she might experience another kind of gap, which hopefully can be overcome. Denial is good for us in certain circumstances. It supports us to be able to handle the situations. But if we are in denial for a very long time and we can't see reality as it is, and we internalize the denial, then it will likely hinder us from living a full life and from seeing reality as it is. And if we don't see reality as it is, it's difficult for us to interact with others and with the world we are living in. We should be careful not to pathologize suffering or pathologize gaps in our lives. It might not necessarily be the best solution to talk to a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a psychotherapist. It might be more supportive to be in a holding environment with people who understand you. So it's easier to handle a gap and overcome it if you are in a supportive community with people who can understand you, who can listen to you, who maybe could help you to understand what happens, and also people who can recognize you that this has happened. Because it's not only about overcoming problems, it's about developing your story and understanding yourself. Sometimes the gaps can be overcome by time and by building other sides of life so that the gap can be counterbalanced by something else. But then, of course, we also have those more serious gaps. When we have been so exposed to trauma, these gaps might be very difficult because they become part of yourself. And I think one of the most difficult kinds of gaps are the kinds of gaps that are within ourselves. When there are sides of ourselves that can't understand, when we feel disconnected from ourselves. I do not mean that we should have this idea of a perfect unitary self. This is I, and I'm always the same person. We have different sides, and we can experience that, oh, is this really me, or how should I be in this situation? But when a person is really feel that he or she is fragmented or can't understand their own actions or reactions or themselves, like if they are fragmented themselves, this is very, very painful. And it takes a lot of holding, both in the context, but also perhaps to talk to another human being that can understand and can help you to slowly integrate those pieces that are fragmented. So the gaps that are in ourselves are very difficult to handle. And of course, they are often connected to something that has happened in the outer world, but they become internalized. If those basic human needs are fulfilled, this could balance the gap and the trauma. So we need to trust the power of people supporting each other. People have experienced gaps, and if we deny that, we can't approach people in a supportive way, because we can also learn from people who have gaps in their lives. So mind the gap.